Here is the question. Should supermarkets be allowed to sell wine? That's a question usually gets BC residents riled up. Just last week, the City of Vancouver approved an amendment to allow grocery stores in Vancouver to stock wine on their shelves. And according to the Alliance of Beverage licensees in BC, not as groundbreaking as it might seem. So joining us here in studio right now, Jeff Gaynard, Executive Director for the Alliance of Beverage Licensees in BC. Jeff, it's so nice to see you in person.
It's nice to see you in person as well.
We've talked so many times the line through COVID and beyond.
Yeah, it's nice to see you.
I was saying, didn't we already have bylaws that were supposed to allow wine in some supermarkets? What's going on here?
Yeah, so this is one of those issues which I'm not quite sure what council is doing, because this is going to have a negligible impact on the market. So the licenses to get a wine on grocery stores actually comes from the province, and they have a cap on the number of licenses, because when we did this a few years ago, we found out it was a massive trade issue with some of our partners, right? Because you can't just choose to sell only BC wines in a market when you have free trade agreements with the European Union and NAFTA and others. So the province is not issuing any new licenses. The city just decided to tinker with their bylaw and say you can do it. It's always been allowed inside of a store, within a store within a store model.
Yes.
Idea, you want to keep teenagers from running down the aisles and grabbing bottles of wine. But now they said you can put it on shelves. So, okay, great. But at the end of the day, this is probably going to have one, maybe two grocery stores carrying wine in the province.
Why is that? Why? Because of the rules? Because of the size? Because of the bureaucracy? Why?
Well, there is a size restriction, because when the government did this, the provincial government a few years ago, they didn't want it to go into convenience stores, and they didn't want to go into big box stores. And that was because when you do that in other jurisdictions, that's where all of the liquor sales go. And we have 670 private liquor stores in this province, over half of which are owned by small little mom and pop family businesses. They're not large corporations, and they invested hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on this existing framework. There's actually a moratorium on new liquor licenses in the provinces. We have health advocates telling us we drink too much. We're all dealing with that as an industry. But now when the city's tinkering with these rules, I think customers can ask is this maybe like a solution in search of a problem? Because at the end of the day, it's not going to have any impact. And it's not going to make it cheaper like it does in the States. They have just different laws down there.
Well, in the States, in Europe, and so many other places where you get your groceries and you grab a bottle of wine on your way out the door or something else. So was your organization consulted in any way before this?
Yeah, extensively. And we're working quite productively with mayor and council on a whole bunch of other issues. We disagree with them on this one. And we said, for example, in the private liquor industry, there's distance criterias, all kinds of rules about how liquor stores have to interact. They don't have the similar rules on these licenses. So we said, if you want to do this, you should use those ones. Otherwise, maybe it's time to look at how we can support Vancouver's hospitality industry, 50% of which are either losing money or barely breaking even right now, instead of trying to help out large grocery chains that are making record profits at this time. So if you look at where these licenses end up, they're often in a Save-On, which is owned by the Overweighty Food Group, which is owned by Jimmy Pattison. So I don't think this policy is helping out the right section of our economy.
Okay, well, and you pointed out yourself sort of different messaging around alcohol consumption, the health issues that can surround it as well. So do you see in that sense that the downside of having the alcohol too accessible?
Well, I don't think alcohol is too accessible in Vancouver or in British Columbia. I think it's, we have private liquor stores and government stores and everybody who works there, they're trained, they have serving it right. Their job is to ensure that we're serving alcohol responsibly. It's one of the reasons there are so many rules in this framework. And while we had concerns about if you put it into a grocery store, it makes it a lot easier for people to walk down the aisle and grab that bottle of wine, where instead of having to make that decision to go to another store. I also heard Councillor Klassen talk about access. I have to say, does anybody listening right now find it difficult to find a bottle of wine in British Columbia? We have over 1,000 other retail locations. Plus, we now have the ability for restaurants, pubs, and bars to sell alcohol with takeaway delivery meals. So we've made a lot of positive changes to liquor policy in the last several years. Unfortunately, we're not going to be retailing in groceries in a significant way. That's a decision the province made. And that was designed to respect the existing framework and investments that other businesses have made too.
I see. So where does Vancouver stand in comparison to other municipalities on this? And we're talking specifically about a Vancouver bylaw right now.
Yeah. What's interesting about those bylaws too is the cities don't have to do anything, right? If they just cede that authority to the provincial government, the province issues the licenses and they can put them in. The city's job is usually to govern land use or any local restrictions that you think make sense here. Typically, what we've seen in other jurisdictions is you want to make sure you don't put wine in a grocery store if it's too close to a school or too close to a treatment facility or other areas where you're trying to protect some element of the population. Some municipalities have put in local distance rules. Some have left it alone entirely. So Vancouver's rules are not unusual. Whether it's a store within a store or wine on shelves, Vancouver can do whatever it wants. At the end of the day, though, let's not pretend this is going to have a significant impact. Really, there's only 1 or 2 licenses available to put in here that Save-On or one of those grocery stores might want to put in. And there's only a couple locations I think they're looking at. So at the end of the day, makes people feel good. Councillor gets to say he's done something great for consumers, but I just don't see it having a real impact. And it was a strange use of council's time the other day.
I see. Okay, well, but you touched on something interesting just now. You're saying there are other things and there are other people that really could use your attention right now in light of the current climate. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we do surveys of the hospitality industry quite frequently because during the pandemic, they were open and closed and open and closed. We lost 15% of the hospitality industry. Those are your neighborhood pubs, bars, your favorite neighborhood restaurants. I mean, everyone's got a story of a favorite restaurant or pub that's closed in Vancouver. We know right now, even a couple years later, we have record levels of debt, right? We're so hurt right now, we can't even afford to pay back that $40,000 loan we got from the federal government through CBA, asking them to extend those deadlines. Fully half of the hospitality industry is either losing money or barely breaking even with a pre-tax profit of less than 2%. We have a lot of local rules here in Vancouver which we can make a big difference to those businesses. Things like distance criteria. For example, if you have a 50-seat restaurant or pub, you technically have to be 150 meters away from any other 50-seat restaurant or pub. What in the world public service or public good is that serving? It just seems an unnecessary rule that makes it harder for businesses to succeed. Or if you're over 1,500 people, the city of Vancouver requires you to have metal detectors. I don't know who they think our customers are, but we don't need metal detectors to keep our customers safe.
How many restaurants have over 1,500 people?
Yeah, you're looking at larger venues. There's a Cineplex going in on the Granville Street that's going to have a bit of a, kind of entertainment complex where you can serve alcohol in the movie theater. If it's a big enough movie theater, you'd have to have metal detectors to go into that movie theater with a glass of beer. Does that make any sense? No. And you know how expensive those things are right now? It's just not the right move.
Wow. I think we've got fodder for many future conversations
Absolutely.
here, Jeff. No, thank you very much for coming in and sort of putting it into perspective what a bylaw like this means in terms of making any significant changes in the supermarket kind of landscape right now. Good to see you.
You too. Great seeing you.
That's Jeff Guinard, Executive Director for the Alliance of Beverage Licensees in British Columbia. And of course, if you would like to weigh in on this, your thoughts are always welcome on the coast at cbc.ca.